Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Rory Fergus Duncan Goodwillie, and I'm a teacher trainer and Assistant Director of Studies at BKC International House. Before we begin the webinar, can you put a plus sign in the comments if you can hear me? This will help us deal with any technical issues in advance. But it looks like we're not having any looking at the comments, which is really good to see. All right. If you do have any problems with the sound or the quality of the internet connection as the webinar goes on, then you can restart the link and this should help deal with the problem. And of course, if there are any connection issues with my internet, for example, and maybe the audio is not so clear, please don't worry, this is being recorded, so you can watch the section that you missed later on. But since it looks like we have no technical issues, we should also find out a little bit more about our audience. Can you write in the comments, please, where you're from, and we'll see exactly who is making up our audience today. So it looks like lots of people coming from Russia, Krasnodar, Moscow. Fantastic. Oh, someone from Belarus, that's great. And lots of people from St. Petersburg, which is nice to see. I had the chance to visit St. Petersburg recently before the lockdown. It was very nice. In the same way I got to visit Voronezh, where a lot of people seem to be coming from. They're really nice places. Oh, and some people from Volgograd as well, where I've also been. It looks like we've got a wide range of people from all across Russia, which is really nice to see. All right. We'll get on with the presentation then. So our topic today is looking at preparing students and also preparing ourselves, if some of you are students, for C1 Advanced Speaking online. Taking a look at our objectives a bit more closely, I'll give you an overview of what's actually expected in this part of in this kind of exam, so the different tasks and times of the speaking test. After that, we'll look at practical online classroom activities. We'll actually get a chance to try some of these out. And then, of course, we'll look at ways to integrate videos into our lessons. I think videos for any class, not just teaching online, are really useful because it can serve as a useful model for students to see exactly what is expected of them in the exam. And the last thing that we'll do is we'll talk about how to integrate our assessment criteria into the lessons as well. Before we move on, it's important to point out, if you have any questions as the presentation progresses, you can write them in the comments, but sometimes the comments progresses very fast and I can't always see them. So there's a special tab for asking questions and you can write them there. If you look at the top of the webinar tab, you'll find a questions section. It's marked next to the comments. The only difference is it's got a question mark on it. And that way I can see the questions more easily. It looks like someone's already asking a question. Someone's saying, will the recording of the webinar be available on YouTube later? And the answer to that is yes, of course it will be. So don't worry if you miss anything, that's absolutely fine. Okay, we'll move on from there then and actually understand the criteria that we're dealing with in terms of our classroom activities today. As always, something I've been repeating throughout this week for teachers, all of us are making this transition to online teaching together, some of us faster than others. All of the ideas that I'm presenting today will be designed to be as simple as possible for both students and teachers to understand. I'll be referring a lot to the platform Zoom. However, if you're not using Zoom, don't worry, you can use all of these ideas with other platforms as well, so that shouldn't be a problem. In the same way, I'll be focusing a lot on shareable documents and shared documents and free resources as well, all of which are really simple to use. So again, if you're not using any of the specific documents which I'm referring to, the same techniques can be applied to any of the materials that you're using. For example, a lot of the activities I'm using involve using Google Documents. But if you're not using that online platform for this, again, they can be transferred. And the last thing to mention, of course, is how important it is to be prepared and patient as we make this transition online together, because of course nothing is perfect when it comes to technology and we all have problems dealing with it. So let's be as patient as possible. And I'll show you how to prepare in advance as well for the different activities that we talk about. So we should actually take a look at our speaking format first of all. If you look in the handbook, you'll see a page like this. The speaking test has 3 parts to it. So we focus on part 1. This is just a very short part. It's the shortest of all the 4 parts. It's only 2 minutes, and it's a short conversation between the interlocutor and each candidate. There's no physical thing for the candidate to look at here. They're just focusing on general interactional language and social language. So the things that we like to do in our free time, and things that we do regularly. We'll look at that in a bit more detail in a moment. And then after part 1, of course, comes part 2, a little bit longer here. The whole thing takes 4 minutes. However, candidates are expected to speak about 1 minute, and they'll speak about a picture or a set of pictures in general, which are presented by the interlocutor. There are 4 people in that room. There will be 2 candidates, an interlocutor who the candidates will speak to, and then behind the interlocutor will be the 4th person. That's the assessor. They're the ones who do the majority of the grading using the assessment criteria, which we'll be looking at later on. The focus for part 2 is slightly different. It's very similar to the B1 speaking. However, instead of 2 pictures, there are 3, but the candidates have to choose 2 of them. And there's similar functions of language expected. However, there's also something to pay attention to, which is speculating. But we'll look at that in a little bit more detail later on. Part 3 is also 4 minutes long, and this involves a conversation talking about a topic which is presented to the candidates by the interlocutor. Right now, for this part, the candidates are expected to talk to each other, not the interlocutor. So that changes it from a sort of monologue in part 2 to a dialogue in part 3. We'll be looking at that in a bit more detail too. And then lastly, part 4, slightly longer, 5 minutes, and this is a discussion about a discussion using questions which are related to part 3. And again, the focus is remarkably similar to part 4 of the B1, part 4 of FCE B2, where they're focusing on expressing their opinions and justifying them. But there's an extra focus here on speculating. So that is the overview of what candidates actually have to do. However, we have to prepare for this kind of test. So how to do this, especially with online classes. Let's look at part 1 first. But before, since we're dealing with online classes, one way of warming up for this particular task, well, we're talking about sort of regular things that we do in everyday life for this part. So I thought one activity that any teacher can do, regardless of what platform you're using, is a guessing game. Now, like every good teacher, I have my diary here, and in my diary I write down things that I do every day. So your job is, in the comments, you've got 1 minute to guess, and I will be timing you using my stopwatch. Can you guess, what things do you think I do every day in my diary? And you've got 1 minute to guess. Some of you have said teaching, great, all right. Other people have said wake up. I do wake up, I don't have that in my diary though. People have planning, good. Meditating is a good one, I don't have that though. Drink coffee, I do like to drink coffee, but I don't have it in my diary. So we've got teaching and lesson planning, I definitely have them. Jogging, not so much in the quarantine, sorry. Exercise, yes, I have that, great. Relaxing, I don't have that in my plan, but I should do, probably. You've still got 30 seconds, and there's 2 more to guess. Yoga, no. Preparing for webinars, no, that's just been this week. It's not something I do regularly. Take a shower. Well, I don't have that in my diary, but I do that every day. Some people are saying cooking. I'm very sorry, I don't cook every day. Study, some people have. I do that, but you'll need to be more specific. That's 1 minute up. So I'll talk about that in a bit more detail now. I do plan every day, so you guessed that correctly. And I do teach every day, and I do exercise every day, which is great. The 2 that you're missing are, I do study. Some people guess studying, but you need to be more specific. I study Russian every day because, well, I live in Russia, and it's important to keep the level of language up. And the second thing I do is write every day. That was on my list of 5 things from my diary. What you can do with this kind of task is, after that, you can ask your students to brainstorm the different things that they do every day, and then students have to guess what they have. The reason why is one of the questions that we're going to look at today is how much time do you spend doing things? So this is a good warm-up task, and then we can launch into more detailed questions about everyday activities that we do. And it's fun to guess at what other people do in their daily lives as well. So it's interesting and it's effective preparation. Let's look at the exam in more detail though. So if we look at this here, we actually need to orientate our students to the actual format itself. And one way of doing this, I use Google Docs, but if you're using a different platform, don't worry, you can do exactly the same thing. And here, what I did for my students was I created a table and I asked them to watch part 1 and make a record of what different candidates say in response to these questions. I didn't write the full questions, I just wrote some of the words from the questions so that candidates have an idea of what to focus on when they're actually looking at the video and listening to what the candidates say. So we should probably try this task. Now, in order to do that, we're going to need to give you the task itself. So what I will do is I'm going to show you the task and let you download it. In the chat, I'm going to post the link to the Google document. You can download this document. You won't be able to edit it. This document is view only. So when you see it, you can download it. If you can't download it, then you can screen capture what's here on the presentation, or you can screen capture the document as well. So I'm going to post the link in the chat now, and you can download that. You have 1 minute to do that. Then we'll watch the video and find out exactly what our candidates say. Just to check and make sure we're not having any technical issues, when you download the file, or if you're having trouble downloading the file, can you please say in the comments, please don't say that you've got the document, just because it will clog up the chat, but it looks like a lot of you are very enthusiastic to say that, so I'll post the link one more time just so people have access to it. It's also important to point out a good backup plan, because our students are using lots of different devices and technology. So if they don't have a computer to download to, or maybe their connection's a little bit slow, yes, then you can just tell them to screen capture it, or maybe you can email it to them as well. All of these options for this kind of task are absolutely fine. It just means that they'll have to write down the answers rather than type them. Some people are commenting that you can't write anything on the document. That's correct. It's a view-only document, so you'll need to download it. To do this, you'll go to File and then Download later on. So that's been 1 minute. Now, without further ado, let's watch part 1 and see exactly what our 2 candidates say. As ever, though,
Good morning. My name is Bridget.
before we go any further, can everyone hear? Lots of plus signs, fantastic. If the connection is not so good as the video progresses, don't worry, you're able to listen again, and you'll be able to mark this later when the presentation is over.
My colleague Mary Whiteside. And your names are?
Raphael.
Raphael?
Maud.
Maud. Can I have your mark sheets, please? Thank you. First of all, we'd like to know something about you. Raphael, where are you from?
I'm from Lucerne. It's a city in Switzerland. and it's in the German part.
And what do you do there?
I'm still at school and have 2 years to go.
Maud, how long have you been studying English?
Well, I think I've been studying English for about 6 years now. Yes.
What do you enjoy most about learning English?
It is very useful. I mean, to talk with foreigners. I have a lot of foreign friends, and I really enjoy being able to talk with them.
Maud, do you think you spend too much time working or studying?
Well, sometimes maybe because I'm hardworking, I like it, and sometimes I think I should rest, take time to rest. Yes.
Why?
Because, well, when I study, I stayed at home. I didn't go out with friends, or I don't like working at a cafe or something. So it's not very a social activity. Yeah. So I should meet my friends and go out.
Raphael, do you like using the internet to keep in touch with people?
Yeah, sometimes. But to keep in touch with people, I think it's better to see them face to face, not just writing. So, but like something like Facebook, I think it's useful like a contact book, but not really as interaction between people.
In this part of the test,
So we've had the chance to meet our candidates and learn something about them. Let's focus on some answers. The very first thing we're asked is, what are the names of the candidates? Can you write the names of the candidates in the chat, please? A lot of people are writing Maud's name. Not many people caught Raphael's name. Ah, yes, there we go. Some of you have got it now. Wonderful. And where are they from? Yep, a lot of people are saying Switzerland. Fantastic. All right. Now, here I'll point out in the document, I blanked out some parts of the document which we downloaded. And the reason why I did that was just to focus students' attention on what the different candidates were saying. Sometimes they were getting a little bit overexcited and perhaps saying different things about different people. As your candidates progress and develop their listening skills, you can take this away and just increase the level of challenge to focus them a little bit more. But if we really think about Raphael, what does Raphael do? He's at school, he studies. Fantastic, yeah. Some people are writing that he's a schoolboy. Yeah, I haven't heard that word in quite some time. Great. If we switch over to talk about Maud now, so how long has she been studying English and what does she enjoy most about it? A lot of people have got 6 years. Fantastic. Yep, about 6 years. And she does say it's useful, yes, and she likes talking with it. Great. And then she asked the question, sorry, she has asked the question, does she spend too much time studying? I think a lot of students would probably say yes to that. And yep, a lot of people heard her say that as well, yeah. I think you would be very hard pressed to find someone who doesn't think they spend too much time working or studying. And then we've got the last question, which was asked not to Maud, but to Raphael. Does he like using the internet to keep in touch with people? And why? So a lot of us are saying yes, but he prefers face-to-face communication. Absolutely. So I wonder how Raphael is coping right now if he's having his classes online. Hopefully he's getting used to this. So this is one kind of task which can be used to familiarize students with the format as well. But also, we can use the same idea to give students practice. Now, how to do that? if we have a look at the next slide here, what we can do is we can create role plays. So if we look at this document here, this Google document is sent to one of 3 students in a Zoom breakout room. Again, I use Zoom for my classes. You might use different platforms. Don't worry if you do. The concept is the same. So this one student here has this grid, and underneath he has the exam script for the interlocutor. Now, as you can see, different questions from the exam script are blanked out. This is to do with familiarizing the students with the exam procedure, because in this part of the exam, students are asked different questions. We shouldn't be asking them the same question for both candidates or for both students, because that's not realistic, and students should be prepared for this. It also prevents students from copying what other students are saying, so they don't lose points or lose marks for this. Now, one of the things about these grids is that it's useful for the interlocutor because it gives them something to do other than just read from the script. And also it gives a structure, what it is that's actually being said as well. The other thing from the teacher's perspective is it's quite useful to have multiple grids for multiple groups if you're teaching large classes, because it helps you monitor the different groups. If a grid is filling up with information very fast or at a normal pace, then you can see which students are going to finish quickly and maybe you need a different task to do, or you can see if it's slowly filling up, then you can see which groups might be struggling a little bit to come up with information and questions and answers. So then you know where to focus your efforts when you're monitoring your students. Now, you might be wondering why I've got these 2 pictures here. The reason why is this kind of task, because we're producing information about our lives quite regularly, it can become a little bit boring for the students if they're just repeating the same information constantly. So what I did was I created a role play for my students. Now, notice that I said in the presentation it's a minimal role play. The reason why is this increases the level of challenge for advanced students. For A2, B1, and B2 students, a little bit of support can be given with role cards. But here, what I did was I just gave these students the pictures of the different roles they had to play. So one of them is in the role of Donald Trump, and the other one is in the role of Hillary Clinton. And they're having to imagine how these different individuals would answer these questions about things they do in their day-to-day lives. This makes things a little bit more fun and fresh for the students, and it's more creative as well, so I think it promotes their engagement with the task. Of course, some students might not recognize certain politicians from different parts of the world, so you could feel free to use pictures of different people. Maybe local politicians or local figures or famous people might be more appropriate. Now, we come to talking about speaking part 2. In speaking part 2, students are presented with a set of 3 pictures, but they're only expected to talk about 2 of them. One of the activities that I've designed to promote this idea with B2 level is something that I'm going to speak about again here. Now, what I did was I created a board game. If you're wondering where this resource comes from, don't worry. When the presentation is over, there will be a list of sources at the very end that you can see, and you'll be able to find out where to download this resource. And in the same way, when I describe the procedure, if the connection fails or if something I say isn't clear, don't worry, the website also has a procedure of how to use this game in particular. We should recognize the game though. If you have a look here, it's snakes and ladders. And what happens is you go to the website and download this document here. It's an Excel spreadsheet. However, if you don't have Excel, then that's not a problem. You can transfer it to other free software, which is very similar. And what needs to happen is you prepare questions about the different pictures that are in the task, and then it produces this lovely snakes and ladders board here. Once that's done, you will need to convert the worksheet itself to a PDF. You can do that on your computer if you have the software. If you don't have the software, you can do a very quick internet search, and there are sites that will do this conversion for free. So again, don't worry if you're not so sure how to do this. Everything can be done just by a simple Google search. Once that's done, you just have to copy and paste the grid here onto Google Draw. I must stress, this is not Google Docs, it's Google Draw. The reason why it's Google Draw is because you'll see here I added different counters to the Google Draw document, because as the students will play this game, they'll have a random dice generator. Again, lots of these are available online. And as they progress, they can move their counter as well as they play the game and as the numbers on the dice change. It's important to point out whether you're sharing Google Docs or Google Draw or similar documents, you will need to share them, and you will need to share an editable version. So please make sure when you share this with your different students and different groups of students, you send them one that they can edit. Here with Google, there's a share option. You just click this and you can change the option from view to share. So students can actually move the different counters around. This is super important because you don't want to send them something that they can't change. Here, again, what I've done is I've presented only 2 of the pictures, and I've presented a series of questions to the students. The questions are designed to compare just 2 of the pictures. A trap some students can fall into is talking about all 3 pictures, when in fact they only need to talk about 2. So that's an important thing that can be covered in a task that's designed like this. Here, this is taken from a B2 level class. However, the questions can be exactly the same. The task was your photographs show people doing different jobs where listening is important. One picture shows a call center worker, and the other picture shows a teacher of young learners. One example of a question that I chose for this was, which job do you think is more valuable for society? So if you think about a call center worker and a teacher, which job do you think is more valuable for society and why? You can write that in the comments very quickly, although I think that it will be fairly predictable which job people are going to choose. Some people are choosing teacher. Remember, when you write in the comments, you don't just pick the job, you have to say why. Remember, if you're doing this in the exam, you have to justify your opinion as well. Some people are saying both jobs are important. That's absolutely fine. Remember, when you make your contribution, you've got to say why. You have to justify your opinion. There we go. Some people are saying a teacher because they shape the next generation. Some people are saying teaching because it's creative and encouraging. Although some people are pointing out that in an emergency situation, a call center worker is more important. Fantastic. All right. Now, one thing to mention about this is you can create this this document, and then you can get your students to do it in different groups, and then you monitor the different groups to see how they're doing and provide feedback. The next step in this process might be to involve the students in creating a new worksheet. So what you want to do is, if you can, share your screen with the students and let them come up with new questions to the task. They can also, because the document is editable, they can change the pictures and maybe they can change the question and the task as well. The reason why is this again involves students in the tasks more, it's more engaging for them, and of course it's interesting to test students' grammar and give them immediate error correction. So this serves multiple purposes which are quite useful. Some people are asking how to find a dice generator. You would simply just type in dice generator in whatever search engine you're using, and that will bring it up almost immediately. If we move on from there to talk about, keep talking about part 2 of the speaking test. This is what students will actually be presented with. If you look at the part with the red arrow, they're presented with a series of 3 pictures, and the students are presented with a task of what might the people be pointing at, and why might the people be doing this. Now, this is very similar to the task that's done at B2 level. However, there are 3 pictures, and there's this extra focus on speculating. So the language for speculating here, he might be plus ing, they could be plus ing. Now, it's important to focus on only 2 of the pictures. So you'll need to remember this whenever you're talking to your students about this task. One way of approaching this kind of task, which gives students time to prepare their thoughts and what they want to say, is by using a free website called Padlet. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to experiment with Padlet. I'm going to share the link to a Padlet. It looks remarkably like this here. And what you do is you'll go to the website. In the bottom right corner, there's a pink plus sign. You would click on that, and that allows you to add your comments and suggestions for this particular task. Now, remembering that the task here is what might the people be pointing at, and why might they be doing this? I'm going to share the link for this Padlet in the comments section, and we can build up a set of suggestions together. So, if you look in the comment section, there should be a link to a Padlet there. If you can go there and you can add your comment, remember using the pink plus sign in the bottom right-hand corner, then you'll be able to add your comments. You can also double-click anywhere on the Padlet itself, and you can add your suggestions too. While we're waiting for that to build up, someone is asking the question, could you get an A in the CAE speaking if you use diverse structures and complex language? Actually, just to answer that question, we're going to look at that in a bit more detail later on. In the same way someone is asking questions about the vocabulary, we're also going to look at that later on when we talk about the criteria. So I'm looking at the Padlet here, and it looks like there are multiple people accessing this, and they're adding their own ideas, which is great. If you're unable to open this, don't worry. What you can do is we'll share the link with the presentation at the end, and then you can access this later, and you can see what different people have contributed to it. But we can focus on some of the examples here. For example, in the picture that I have they all seem to be trying to help each other, perhaps by pointing out the problem. Another person has commented, in the first picture, the guy is probably pointing at a problem. Some people are asking if they can use the site for free. Yes, you can. Another person is asking, why are the pictures the same? That's one thing I should mention about this. When I was trying to add the pictures, when I tried to add it as a single picture, it was only showing one of the 3 pictures. But of course, I wanted to add all 3 pictures, so I had to change it to tile mode. This is why the pictures repeat. However, it still serves the purpose of showing the task while the students are actually trying to come up with language and brainstorm as well. And it looks like we've got lots and lots of suggestions on the Padlet as well. That's great. If we move on with the presentation, you of course crowdsource your ideas with the Padlet, and then you can copy and paste those onto a Google document, which you can share with all of the students. And then you can, first of all, narrow down the suggestions that are useful for the task and integrate them into something that we're going to look at for part 3, which is creating dialogues. Now, as I pointed out at the beginning, part 3 is a dialogue between the 2 candidates, and so it's important for them both to speak in this case. Here, I've copied and pasted the task from the Cambridge Handbook. You can find the Cambridge Handbook on the Resources for Teachers section of the Cambridge website. The link to that will also be at the end of the presentation if you want to find that too. And here, what I did was I copied and pasted it, and I put students in pairs, and they had to create a dialogue about the different topics. This is good from the point of view of the teacher, because what you can do is you can highlight useful pieces of language in green, and then the students can take these from the dialogue from this task and integrate it into their new dialogue. So there's some continuity, and they can revise the language as well. You can also, as I've done here, highlight a language that's it's not incorrect, but it is repeated. And we want to avoid students repeating language. To get a higher score, we want to see a variety of language. So this is useful for encouraging students to do this. And of course, over time, what you want to do is rely on the dialogues less and less. So at the beginning, you would like to see like full dialogues, but then you can tell students they just need to take notes to refer to, and as time goes on, the dialogue disappears completely, and the students are just left with the task here, and they can practice just by doing that. And then the job of the teacher becomes effective monitoring of the different groups to provide feedback on the language that they use. But of course, where to get these expressions? Well, we can use a similar activity for part 4, which is a discussion about the different topics in part 3. But you could use any single video. So if you have a look here, if we look at the task, it's all about decision making. And for part 4, the students are going to discuss decision making in a bit more detail. What I've done is I've created another task for this, which will focus on part 4. What I'd like you to do is either you can screen capture this task here and write the answers by hand, or I'm going to share another video task with you in the comments for you to download, and we're going to look at our candidates Maud and Raphael again as they engage in speaking part 4. So our job here will be to complete the gaps with the useful language they use for this discussion. This is very similar to what was done with our task for part 1. You just go there. Again, you cannot edit this document, but you will need to download it. You just go to File, and then that brings up a set of options, and you click Download, and you can download that as a different document. I've posted the link in the chat. Again, if you have problems with downloading, then please let me know, and we can try and fix that. There are lots of different ways of fixing that. Like I say, one way of doing that is by taking a screenshot or a screen capture of the task as it's presented here, or doing the same thing in the Google document. But it looks like a lot of people are able to access this document, which is great. While we're preparing, if your students are having a little bit of difficulty downloading, maybe it's taking a lot of time to download, you can also ask them to predict what it is they're going to hear as well. So they're not only working on their speaking skills, they're working on their listening skills as well, which is making predictions about what they're going to hear in the listening is actually quite a useful task for activating the vocabulary they're going to hear beforehand too. Okay, now we should actually get ready to listen to Maud and Raphael again. Some people are asking, they faced a problem while doing part 3 yesterday when they're asked the final question, is it necessary for us to come up with the same decision?
Raphael, is it best for people to make decisions on their own, or
Can everyone hear the audio? Wonderful. Someone is asking if the students are actually C1 level. Well, we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail when we talk about the criteria. If you can't hear the audio, please don't worry. Again, the session is being recorded, so it's you'll have the chance to listen again if you don't quite get the chance to hear once it's been.
to ask others for advice?
I think it's always important to consider other opinion because they have a different view on the topic or on the question. And so I think it's always important to ask as many people as possible and consider the different points.
Mm-hmm. Do you agree, Maud?
Well, in some ways, yes, but I think that some people can should make their own decision when they think that the advice that all the people give them are not very strong. So, yes.
Maud, some people think it's best to plan their lives carefully. Others prefer to make spontaneous decisions. What's your opinion?
Well, again, it depends on the individuals, and I think that planning your life is very important. In my opinion, planning studies and holidays is very important, because when you study, you don't have a lot of time to leave to holiday. So if you book a holiday or something like that, you need to think about it before.
Do you agree, Raphael?
Yes, I agree, but I think it's also important that we don't plan everything, because when we don't reach it at the end, we maybe be depressed, and so it's always just the most important thing we should plan.
Why do you think some people find it harder to make decisions than others?
I think that some people are not very used to make their own decisions. Yes. Like when you have very pushy parents, you don't really get to make your own decision.
And maybe some people are scared about the following.
Yes.
Yeah,
the other opinions, yeah. Or.
And also, it's like, I think it's like you. Either you are very good in making decisions, then you should also be like a leader for a group or something. But when you don't, I think it's better when you just listen to someone else.
Yes, listen to someone's advice, yeah.
How do you think young people can be helped to take on responsibilities?
I think it's important that they are taught in school about this, and also from the parents at home.
Yes, very important. The parents, I think, play a very important role, because they are like an example for their children, and yes, they should teach them the good way of making a decision, and how to pre-think about how to make a decision. Yeah.
I think you can also start at an early age with like giving them little tasks to do, and then they have the responsibility to do the task, and then they learn what it means.
Yes, or often ask them questions like, what do you want, what do you think, so that they can talk and share their.
All right. The discussion doesn't quite finish there. However, that's the part that our task focuses on. So we should actually find out what the answers were to what the different candidates were saying. So here are our gaps. And of course, you would want to ask students for feedback and then try and drill some of these useful phrases. I'm going to show them here so that everybody can see the different pieces of language which are used. Now, I picked these phrases and expressions in particular because they show that the candidates are listening to what their partner is saying and they're responding to what their partner is saying. This will be really important for a discussion task, especially since interactive communication is something that we look at with the actual speaking criteria itself when we talk about assessment. We won't delve into the answers so much. However, if you want to look at them later and check that you got everything, then great. We actually have to talk about the assessment criteria in a bit more detail now. So when you look at the handbook, which is provided by Cambridge, you'll see something like this. And it's rather intimidating. So what I've done is I've broken it down slightly. The 5 criteria that are used are grammatical resource, lexical resource, discourse management, pronunciation, and interactive communication. Now, these can sound like rather intimidating words, so I'm going to oversimplify them just to try and clarify the meaning as much as possible. However, this will be a very short presentation. If you want to know more about the specifics of each individual criteria, you can download the handbook, and there's a very in-depth set of explanations there. So like I say, I'll simplify and generalize. Grammatical Resource talks about the different kinds of grammar and grammar structures that you use. Can you use them accurately, and can you use various ones as well? So here it's all about making sure that the form is correct, and also that we use different kinds of structure too. So not always present simple, not always past simple, but present perfect continuous, using these together to make sure the scores for this particular aspect get to the level that the candidates deserve. In the same way, Lexical Resource focuses on accuracy, so using the language, but using it correctly as well. So not using vocabulary that's unsuitable for the task. In the same way, using a variety. What you might notice with some candidates is that the terms good and nice are frequently used, but we should try and use different adjectives to describe things to bring up the score for Lexical Resource when using these adjectives. Discourse management sounds very technical, and it is. So I've just summarized it by saying, are the things that candidates say relevant? How much do candidates hesitate? Now, hesitating is okay, because sometimes we need to think of ideas, but it must be because we're thinking of ideas, and it must not be very often, because candidates, if they lose track of the conversation, or if their other candidate loses track of what it is that's being said, then that will affect the score. So it's okay to think of ideas and take a few seconds to do this, but what you have to do is make sure that you're not doing this because you don't know what it is you want to say in English in terms of the grammar or the vocabulary. And there's also here connection. It's important to connect your answers to what is being said. So if you're doing a discussion task, for example, like Maud and Raphael were doing, they were listening to each other and building on what was being said as well. So it was like, yes, I agree, but sometimes I also think this. In the same way, for pronunciation, it's all about being clear and appropriate. So using the appropriate intonation when asking questions, for example, and making sure that it's possible for people to understand what it is you're saying. At higher levels, using your pronunciation to convey or enhance the meaning of what's being said. So putting the stress placement in the right place for highlighting a particular word, this kind of thing. And then lastly, interactive communication. So are you working with what is being said effectively? Are you actually having a discussion with your partner, or are you talking at them? Are you just saying your opinion and not engaging with their opinion? In the same way, are you working effectively in the discussion, or are you just giving a monologue? So if you're giving a monologue, then that will bring down the score for interactive communication. Like I say, this is a general overview. If you want to know more, then there's a comprehensive breakdown of these in the handbook for the level, which will be available at the website at the end of the presentation. So most candidates wonder how to move from B2 to C1 level. If you look here, this is band 1 for C1 level speaking. Now, band 1 is very similar to band 3 for B2 level. This is because Cambridge's assessment criteria are designed to connect one level to the next in a logical fashion. So here, if you're not at C1 level, but you are in fact at B2, then you would meet this kind of criteria here. If you're at the C1 level, then you would get 3 or above. So this is important if we're assessing our students, because of course we see 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and we assume that 5 is the best, but it's not. 3 is the average, and it's where we should be starting for advanced level. And then if the candidates perform better, then we can move up to 5 and 4, which is closer to C2 level. And if they're performing less, then we move down, which is closer to B2 level. Again, a comprehensive explanation of this is given in the handbooks themselves. So we can see here, if we look at grammar, shows a good degree of control of simple grammatical forms and attempts on complex grammatical forms. Here, attempts for B2. But here, it shows a good degree of control of both simple and some complex of grammatical forms. So it can't just be attempting. It's got to actually be done successfully for this kind of thing. And the same thing is true for a lot of the different features here. In B2 level, uses appropriate vocabulary to give and exchange views, but only when talking about familiar topics. For a C2 level candidate, it will be familiar and unfamiliar topics. So they've got to be ready to talk about things which are not familiar to them in the discussions. We can see for pronunciation that is intelligible is one, intonation is appropriate. Intonation is generally appropriate for B2 level. So this means that some mistakes can be made at B2 level, but here at C1, it's not really acceptable for the intonation to be inappropriate. And in the same way, sentence and word stresses accurately place. Here, sentence and word stress is generally accurately placed. So what we're looking for here is candidates displaying that they can actually use stress placement successfully most, if not all, of the time here. And again, individual sounds are articulated clearly. And here we have generally. So at the lower level, some mistakes are in the stress placement and the individual sounds might be acceptable. But here we're expecting clear articulation and things to be intelligible. In the same way, for interactive communication, maintains and develops the interaction and negotiates towards an outcome. This is important because, like we say, we have to be showing that we're negotiating towards some kind of decision, especially in the discussion task. So here, for B2 level, negotiating toward an outcome with very little support. So both candidates have to be working independently and not relying on what each other are saying. They have to try and work together to express their own individual viewpoints and come to a conclusion. And then here we have initiates and responds appropriately for C1 level, linking contributions to those of the other speakers. Again, what Maud and Raphael were doing, they were listening to each other and they were building on what was being said. So that's quite important to move past C1 level and above from a band 3. Some of us might be a little bit more advanced, so moving beyond the average C1 level to include bands 3, 4, and 5. Here, for grammar, for a band 5, which is closer to C2 level, a proficiency, maintains control. So it's not just about sometimes you can maintain control and sometimes you can't. Here, it's got to be consistent control of the language. So things like third person S need to be used consistently at this level. The same thing is true of the lexical resource. It's got to be consistent. And in fact, you could probably describe all of band 5 as the language being consistent. Like I say, band 5 for C1 actually overlaps with C2 level. So here, again, we talk about the logical connections between the different levels here. This is quite important. However, we actually have to try using these here. So with this in mind, there are different ideas for using the criteria. I'll mention them briefly here. Once you've learned what the different criteria mean in a bit more detail, then you can ask the candidates to assess themselves, or you can ask them to assess each other when they do different tasks. Perhaps it might be useful to have, you remember in part 1, we had the interlocutor student playing that role, and then we had the 2 students playing the role of the candidates. Maybe a 4th person could be added there to play the role of the assessor with stronger candidates who understand the criteria. But one that I particularly want to focus on with you to round off our presentation is role models. Now, what do I mean by role models? Well, we're going to listen to Maud for 2 minutes when she gives her part 2 response. We're only going to listen to her for, actually, it's less than 2 minutes here, and we're going to try and assess Maud using the different criteria. How are we going to do that, though? Well, again, Google Docs will come to our rescue. I've prepared a Google Doc for you. Again, it's view only, so you'll have to download it. But it's in the comments there. And if you can download that document or screen capture it, if it's not possible to see the document, then you can take just write down the different criteria and then leave a space for the grade that you want to give, from 1, the lowest, 2, 3, the average that's expected for the level, 4 and 5, above average for the level. So again, just to remind you of the different criteria: grammatical resource, lexical resource, discourse management, pronunciation, and interactive communication. So hopefully everyone is downloading properly. Again, if there's a problem with this, then this is our backup plan. If you just screen capture here, and I'll get us ready to listen to Maud. And as always,
So students doing different activities. I'd like you to compare two of the activities and say how students can benefit from doing these activities and how helpful the activities might be in preparing them for their future lives. All right.
it seems that everyone can hear. Again, if you can't hear or if you have to leave, then the presentation is being recorded, so you can check this task later.
Okay, so let me see. So I'd like to talk about these two pictures. Well, there are, on these two pictures we can see two students who are doing different things. I think she is studying, so well, while studying she gained knowledge and she get prepared for a test, maybe something, so it helps her preparing it, and maybe she will pass the test if she work hard. So, and this student is giving a presentation, and it will help her develop a kind of ease while talking to other people. So if she wants to be well, in maybe entertainment field, it will be very useful for her to be able to talk to people.
Thank you. Raphael, which of these activities do you think is most useful?
I think it's this one where they build a, I think it's a tent.
All right, so we've just listened to part 2 of Maud's contribution. If we think about grammatical resource, what kind of scores would you give her? You can write the number in the comments box. A lot of people are saying 3. All right, let's talk about lexical resource. What kind of number would you give for her there? Seeing lots of 3s and 2s. All right. And discourse management, what would you give her? 3s and 4s. All right. And what about if you have your pronunciation and interactive communication? If you put 2 numbers for this in the comments, what do you think she got for that? 3/4, lots of 4s. Great, okay. Well, let's have a look at these in a bit more detail, shall we? So the grades are for grammar. A lot of you were right. She got a 3 for that. And the other criteria she got 4s for. But what did the examiner actually say about this? Well, here, the examiner said she shows a good control and range of simple and complex grammar. So here you see the example. Every situation depends on the kind of relationship you have. But there are problems with third person S here. She gain knowledge, she get prepared. So again, it's inconsistent. So it can't quite be much higher than a 3, unfortunately, for Maud. And then we have a 4 for lexical resource. Again, she talks about relationship, to share ideas in the field, well, in the entertainment field here. So all of these are good topic-specific vocabulary for what she's talking about. And in the same way, when we talk about her contributions, well, they are relevant. She talks about the two pictures, and she says specifically, I want to talk about these two pictures. So she highlights what it is she's talking about, and she then gives a focused commentary on these things. And she doesn't hesitate much either. It seems like she knows exactly what she wants to say about these things. And the same thing for pronunciation. She's almost always intelligible. We can always understand what it is she's going to say, even though she sometimes wavers a little bit with a couple of lapses in her sentence stress, but it's not a big deal. And lastly, when it comes to interactive communication, well, she's talking about something unfamiliar quite successfully. She's never seen these pictures before, so this is actually quite successful on her part. So that does bring us to the end of all of the sort of practical ideas in terms of integrating the different criteria for the different parts and activities for the different parts. I did anticipate a few problems, though, that teachers and students might have. So the first thing was monitoring. Again, like I mentioned, you can have multiple tabs for different groups, and you can use this to monitor. But if you're using Zoom or other video conferencing software and you have a smartphone, you can add your smartphone in and move it around the different breakout rooms, and then you can monitor the students by listening as well as looking at the tabs. Again, for the motivation, we talked about encouraging students to personalize, so giving them role cards, allowing them to create things, and of course, encouraging them to take regular breaks from the screen. So it's nice to have tasks where you ask students very quickly to, well, if we talk about familiar objects, then just ask them, find something in your room that you want to talk about. Take a break from the screen and bring it, and then we'll talk about something familiar to you. So very small changes like that can stop students from getting tired eyes or just becoming a bit exhausted from looking at a screen all the time. From a teacher's perspective, preparation time. I hope the activities I've highlighted today will be things that you can create easily and reuse. And certainly that's something that we should aim for, having activities that we can use again and again for multiple classes, multiple times. Other people might suggest that students might struggle with different parts of the different tasks. What I would say is, hopefully you've got enough time between now and the exam date, so don't be afraid to take it just one step at a time. For example, focusing in one lesson only on preparation for part 1, and then only on preparation for part 2, etc. The same thing for the marking criteria or the assessment criteria. If you focus only on one aspect per lesson, and that way the students will have a focus, and then that will help them. Now, that is the anticipated problems and solutions I have, but of course there might be questions that others have too. If you have questions, can you post them in the questions section, please, not the comments one? It just makes it easier to have everything in the same place. People are talking about, do the interlocutors count the number of C2 and C1 words? They don't count the number of words, but they are trained to notice specific C2 and C1 level collocations. So it's not about counting mistakes, it's not about counting words, it's about noticing what comes up more often. In the same way, someone said, should you make a conclusion at the end of speaking parts 2 and 3, or just keep talking? I don't think you need to make a conclusion to part 2 when you're comparing the pictures, because the task is just to compare and speculate. The same thing for part 3. I don't think that's necessary until for part 3 the examiner asks you to approach a conclusion. Here we have some teachers tell their students the marks in the speaking part are divided equally between the two candidates, especially in the speaking part of the dialogue. That's not so much a question. Will there be any webinar on C2 exam preparation? I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. That's something that our administrator will perhaps have to deal with. Someone is asking, is there a list of C1 level words? Well, there's not, I think in the handbook, just from memory, there's a list of things which are expected. However, English Profile, which is also something that Cambridge is working on, also has a list of other of C2 level words. So you can see them here for what's actually expected. Someone is asking, should a candidate use complicated phrases and constructions? Well, it depends what you mean by complicated. I think when it comes to grammatical forms, it's important to try and aim for higher level things and using them accurately. So, of course, conditional sentences, things like present perfect continuous. These are just some examples. There's a comprehensive breakdown in the handbooks themselves. Someone is asking, in part 3, do the candidates have to talk about each item in turn, or one candidate can talk about one thing and the other candidate can just agree and move on to the next item? That's one pattern that can be done. The important thing is to discuss most of the options that are presented, and with the aim, in the time frame that you're given. In 2 minutes, it might not be possible to have a discussion about all of the things, but try and talk about as many of them as is possible. And of course, give a justification for the opinion as well. There is no winning formula for this, I'm afraid, so that's about as detailed an explanation as I can give. And then here someone is asking, if a student has B2 level, how difficult might it be to pass C1? Well, it would be easy for a student to understand the criteria and the format, but if they don't have the language of a C1 level candidate, then they might struggle. So it's important to prepare for these different. Some people are also asking if it's possible to organize a webinar in terms of the listening parts. I'm afraid that is again something that our administrator will have to do. I'm hoping that's the case, but I'm afraid I don't make those decisions. However, that does bring us to the end of the time that we have allotted for this. We're running slightly over, actually. So thank you very much, everyone, for coming today. I hope you've learned a lot. And like I say, at the end of the presentation, which is here, this is a list of the sources of everything that we used today. You're very welcome to investigate them when you have your own free time. But thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your Friday, and have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye.